Imagine that you finally decide to change your life. You wake up one morning and tell yourself that things are going to be different now. You are going to study seriously. You are going to build that business. You are going to write that book. You are going to exercise. You are going to learn a new skill. You are going to stop wasting hours on your phone. For a few minutes, you feel powerful. You feel like a completely different person. And then something strange happens. You suddenly feel tired. You check your phone for just 5 minutes. You tell yourself that you will begin after breakfast. Then after lunch. Then in the evening. And before you realize it, the entire day is gone. The next morning, you make the same promise again. This cycle can continue for weeks, months, and sometimes years. The painful part is that you already know what you should be doing. You are not confused. You are not necessarily lazy. You may actually want success more than anything. So why is it so difficult to begin? And why does the moment you decide to do something meaningful suddenly become the moment your mind starts producing every possible excuse to stop you? There is an invisible force that appears whenever you move towards something important. It does not always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like entertainment. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like research. Sometimes it sounds like common sense. And sometimes it sounds exactly like your own voice. You tell yourself that you are simply not ready yet. You need better equipment. You need more knowledge. You need more confidence. You need more time. You will start tomorrow. But tomorrow has a strange habit of never arriving. This invisible force is one of the most important ideas behind the war of art. The real battle is not always between you and the outside world. Very often, the battle is between the person you could become and the part of your mind that wants you to remain exactly where you are. And the frightening thing is that this enemy does not need to defeat you completely. It only needs to delay you. One day of delay becomes a week. 1 week becomes a month. 1 month becomes a year. And eventually, a person can look back at their life and realize that the biggest obstacle was never a lack of opportunity. It was the habit of postponing action. Think about something you have wanted to accomplish for a long time. Maybe there is a course you keep saying you will finish. Maybe there is an exam you know you need to prepare for. Maybe you have an idea for a business. Maybe you want to create videos. Maybe you want to become physically stronger. Maybe you want to learn programming. Maybe you want to write. Whatever it is, notice something. The more important the goal becomes, the more convincing the excuses become. If the task means nothing to you, you usually have no problem doing it. But when something matters deeply, suddenly your mind becomes an expert at finding reasons not to begin. This is why procrastination is more dangerous than it appears. People often think procrastination means doing nothing. But procrastination can be incredibly active. You can spend 3 hours watching videos about productivity and still avoid the work. You can organize your desk perfectly. You can download 5 courses. You can create a beautiful schedule. You can research the best tools. You can watch motivational videos. You can talk to everyone about your plans. And yet, at the end of the day, the actual work remains untouched. That is what makes this enemy so clever. It does not always tell you to quit. Sometimes it tells you to prepare forever. Because preparation feels like progress. But preparation, without execution, is simply another form of avoidance. And here is where things become uncomfortable. The resistance becomes strongest when you are closest to something meaningful. If you suddenly feel an enormous urge to check your phone when you are about to study something important, pay attention. If you suddenly want to clean your entire room when you are supposed to work on your dream, pay attention. If you suddenly become obsessed with what other people might think about your idea, pay attention. If you keep waiting for the perfect moment, pay attention. These moments are revealing something about you. They are showing you exactly where the battle is happening. And once you recognize the pattern, you gain something extremely valuable. You can stop believing every excuse your mind gives you. You can look at the excuse and say, I know what this is. It is not a fact. It is resistance. And resistance has one great weakness. It becomes weaker when you act. You do not defeat it by thinking about defeating it. You do not defeat it by becoming perfectly confident. You defeat it by beginning. Open the book. Write the first sentence. Solve the first problem. Record the first minute. Run the first kilometer. Write the first line of code. Make the first call. Take the first uncomfortable step. The beginning does not have to be impressive. It only has to be real. Because once you begin, something changes. The imaginary difficulty becomes a real task. And real tasks can be handled one step at a time. But there is another problem. Even if you defeat resistance today, it will probably return tomorrow. And this is where many people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means forcing yourself to work when you feel terrible. But discipline is much deeper than that. Discipline means deciding who you are before your emotions get a chance to decide for you. If you only work when you feel motivated, then your future depends on your mood. And moods change constantly. One day you feel unstoppable. The next day you feel empty. One day you believe in yourself. The next day you question everything. If your actions depend on those feelings, your progress will always be unstable. The person who eventually creates something meaningful is not necessarily the person with the most talent. Often, it is the person who learns how to continue after the excitement disappears. Because excitement is easy, anyone can begin when they are inspired. The real test comes when nobody is watching. When the work feels boring. When progress is invisible. When the result seems far away. When you begin wondering whether any of it is worth it. That is the moment when amateurs usually negotiate with themselves. They say, maybe tomorrow. The professional says, today is still the day. The difference is not that the professional has no fear. The difference is that fear is no longer allowed to make the final decision. And this is the shift that can completely change your life. You stop asking yourself whether you feel like doing the work. Instead, you ask a much more powerful question. What would the person I want to become do right now? That question removes the mood from the equation. If you want to become a writer, you write. If you want to become a programmer, you code. If you want to become fit, you train. If you want to become knowledgeable, you study. If you want to become a creator, you create. Identity begins to follow action. You do not wait until you feel like a professional. You behave like one first. And slowly, your actions teach your mind who you are. This is where the real war begins. Not tomorrow. Not after you become successful. Not after you become confident. The war begins in the ordinary moment when you know what you should do and you have every possible excuse not to do it. That moment may look insignificant. But repeated thousands of times, those moments become your life. And the question is simple. When that moment comes again, which voice are you going to obey? And the question is simple. When that moment comes again, which voice are you going to obey? Because there is another trap waiting for you once you understand resistance. You may begin thinking that you need to destroy it completely. You may imagine that one day you will become so disciplined that procrastination will disappear, fear will disappear, doubt will disappear, and every morning you will wake up feeling ready to conquer the world. That sounds wonderful, but it is not how the human mind works. Resistance does not permanently disappear. It changes its appearance. You defeat one excuse and another one takes its place. You become disciplined about studying, and suddenly you become distracted by something else. You start exercising, and then you become obsessed with finding the perfect workout. You begin creating content, and suddenly you are worried about whether people will like it. You start building a career, and suddenly you compare yourself with someone who is 10 years ahead of you. The enemy keeps changing its strategy. That is why the goal is not to create a life where resistance never appears. The goal is to become the kind of person who knows what to do when it appears. Imagine two people sitting at the same desk. Both have an important assignment to complete. Both are tired. Both are distracted. Both are afraid that their work will not be good enough. The first person waits until the fear disappears. The second person begins while the fear is still there. Who has the advantage? The second person. Not because they are fearless. Because they understand something the first person has not yet accepted. Action does not always come after confidence. Sometimes confidence comes after action. You write something badly, and then you learn how to write it better. You solve a difficult problem incorrectly, and then you understand your mistake. You publish something that receives little attention, and then you improve the next one. You walk into an uncomfortable situation, survive it, and discover that you were stronger than you thought. Experience creates confidence, and experience can only be created through action. This is why waiting to feel ready can become a lifelong prison. There will almost never be a perfect moment. There will always be another problem. There will always be something missing. There will always be someone more talented. There will always be another reason to wait. But if you keep waiting for perfect conditions, you are secretly asking life for permission to begin. And life may never give you that permission. So begin with what you have. Use the equipment you have. Use the knowledge you have. Use the time you have. Start badly if necessary, because a bad beginning can be improved. A non-existent beginning cannot. There is another powerful shift that happens when you take this seriously. You stop treating your work as something you do only when circumstances are comfortable. You begin treating it as a responsibility. This does not mean you become a machine. You still need rest. You still need relationships. You still need moments when you do absolutely nothing productive. But you stop allowing every uncomfortable feeling to become an emergency. Being tired does not automatically mean you should quit. Being bored does not automatically mean the work is wrong. Being afraid does not automatically mean you should turn around. And having a bad day does not mean you have become a failure. This distinction is incredibly important, because many people judge themselves emotionally. They have one unproductive day and decide they are lazy. They miss one workout and decide they have no discipline. They make one mistake and decide they are not talented. They receive criticism and decide they should stop creating. But professionals judge themselves by something different. They look at the larger pattern. One bad day is not the story. One mistake is not the story. One rejection is not the story. The story is what you do next. That is where resilience is built. You can lose a day and return tomorrow. You can make a mistake and correct it. You can fail and learn. You can be afraid and continue. The ability to return is one of the most underrated forms of discipline. Because perfection is impossible, consistency does not mean never falling. It means refusing to stay down. And there is a reason this matters so much. Your mind learns from repetition. Every time you postpone something important, you teach yourself that discomfort should be escaped. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you teach yourself that your decisions can be trusted. This is why small actions matter. You may think that studying for 30 minutes is insignificant. But you are not only studying for 30 minutes. You are training yourself to become someone who keeps promises. You may think that writing one page is too little. But that page is evidence. Evidence that you are capable of showing up. You may think that one workout cannot transform your body. And it cannot. But one workout can transform your relationship with discipline. Then another follows. Then another. Eventually, the result becomes visible. This is how meaningful change usually happens. Not through one dramatic moment. Through hundreds of ordinary moments that nobody notices. And this brings us to one of the greatest enemies of meaningful work. The desire for immediate results. We live in a world where everything appears to happen instantly. You open an application and information appears. You search for something and receive an answer. You post something and expect immediate reactions. You start learning a skill and secretly expect to become good quickly. But important things rarely work that way. A seed does not become a tree because you stare at it every day. Learning does not become mastery because you feel impatient. A career does not become successful because you desperately want it. The work has to accumulate. And during that accumulation, something dangerous happens. Nothing seems to be changing. You study for weeks but still feel behind. You exercise for months but the mirror does not seem dramatically different. You create videos but the audience remains small. You apply for jobs but the emails keep saying no. You practice a skill but still make mistakes. This is the stage where many people quit. Not because they were incapable. Because they expected visible rewards before they had built enough invisible progress. But progress is often invisible before it becomes obvious. A person may look like they suddenly became successful. What you cannot see are the hundreds of attempts that came before the result. The failures. The boring days. The nights when nobody cared. The moments when they questioned themselves. The work that produced no applause. That is the part most people never see. And perhaps that is why they underestimate it. They see the finished building and forget the years spent laying bricks. If you want to create something meaningful, you must become comfortable working before the evidence arrives. You have to be willing to invest effort into a future that cannot yet prove itself to you. That requires faith, not blind faith that everything will magically work out. Faith in the process. Faith that effort compounds. Faith that skills improve through repetition. Faith that every attempt teaches you something. And most importantly, faith that your worth is not determined by today's result. Because if your only reason for working is praise, you will eventually stop. There will always be someone who criticizes you. There will always be someone who ignores you. There will always be someone who thinks your work is ordinary. If their opinion controls your motivation, they also control your consistency. But when you learn to value the work itself, something changes. You no longer need everyone to understand what you are doing. You no longer need applause before continuing. You can work quietly. You can improve quietly. You can fail quietly. And one day, the results will speak for themselves. This is what it means to move from being an amateur to becoming a professional. An amateur often asks, "Do I feel inspired today?" A professional asks, "What needs to be done today?" An amateur wants the perfect conditions. A professional uses the conditions that exist. An amateur becomes obsessed with the outcome. A professional focuses on the next action. An amateur wants recognition. A professional wants mastery. And the difference is not talent. It is commitment. Once you make that commitment, your relationship with time changes. You stop asking how quickly you can succeed. You start asking how long you are willing to continue. That is a much more powerful question. Because if you can continue for 5 years while someone else quits after 5 months, you have already created an enormous advantage. If you can continue learning while others become distracted, you become more valuable. If you can continue creating while others wait for perfect conditions, you gain experience. If you can continue improving while others chase shortcuts, eventually your accumulated effort becomes difficult to compete with. This is the quiet power of persistence. It does not look dramatic in the beginning. It looks almost boring. Wake up, show up, do the work, learn, make mistakes, correct them, repeat, again, and again, and again. But somewhere along the way, something remarkable happens. The person who once needed motivation begins to need less of it. The person who once feared beginning begins automatically. The person who once needed permission begins trusting themselves. The person who once thought discipline was punishment begins seeing it as freedom. Because discipline gives you something procrastination never can. Control over your own direction. Without discipline, your day is controlled by whatever demands your attention. Notifications, entertainment, other people's opinions, temporary emotions, random impulses. With discipline, you begin deciding where your attention goes. And attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Where your attention goes repeatedly, your life eventually follows. So be careful about what receives it. Because you may think you are simply spending 10 minutes scrolling. But 10 minutes becomes an hour. An hour becomes a habit. A habit becomes a lifestyle. And a lifestyle eventually becomes an identity. The same principle works in the opposite direction. 10 minutes of reading becomes 20. 20 becomes 30. 30 becomes a routine. The routine becomes competence. Competence creates confidence. Confidence creates larger ambitions. And those ambitions can eventually change the direction of your life. The difference begins with something incredibly small. What do you choose to do in the next 10 minutes? Not next year. Not next month. Not when life becomes easier. Right now. Because your future is not built somewhere in the future. It is being built through the choices you repeatedly make today. And that is why the war is never really over. The resistance will return tomorrow morning. It will tell you that you are tired. It will remind you of everything that could go wrong. It will compare you with someone else. It will offer you a comfortable distraction. It will whisper that you can begin later. But now you know its language. You know what it sounds like. And once you recognize it, you have a choice. You can listen to it, or you can stand up and begin. And when you choose to begin, something inside you starts changing. Not immediately, not dramatically, but quietly. You begin to understand that your life is shaped less by what you intend to do and more by what you repeatedly do. You can have the greatest plan in the world, but if you never act on it, the plan has no power. You can have incredible talent, but talent that is never practiced remains only potential. You can have a powerful dream, but a dream without action eventually becomes a source of regret. This is why the most important question is not what do you want from life. The more important question is what are you willing to do repeatedly for it. Because almost everyone wants the result. Very few people want the routine that creates the result. Everyone wants to be fit. Not everyone wants to train when the excitement is gone. Everyone wants financial freedom. Not everyone wants to develop valuable skills for years before the rewards become obvious. Everyone wants to create something meaningful. Not everyone wants to sit alone with an unfinished idea and continue working when nobody is paying attention. Everyone wants confidence, but confidence is usually built by doing difficult things that once frightened you. This is why the ordinary day matters so much. Your life may be changed by one major decision, but it is usually transformed by thousands of small decisions afterward. The decision to study instead of scroll. The decision to practice instead of complain. The decision to finish instead of abandon. The decision to try again instead of deciding that failure is proof you cannot succeed. These choices may look insignificant, but repeated often enough, they become character. And character determines what you do when circumstances become difficult. This is where many people make another mistake. They think they need to discover their perfect purpose before they can begin. They spend months asking, what should I do with my life? What is my passion? What if I choose the wrong path? What if something better exists? Those questions can be useful, but they can also become another form of resistance. Sometimes you do not discover your direction by thinking about it endlessly. Sometimes you discover it by moving. You try something. You become better at it. You discover what you enjoy. You discover what you dislike. You learn what problems you can solve. You meet people. You make mistakes. You adjust. Then you move again. Clarity often appears after action, not before it. You do not need to see the entire road. You only need enough light to take the next step. And this idea can remove an enormous amount of pressure. You do not have to know exactly where you will be 5 years from now. You need to know what deserves your attention today. That is enough, because the future is too large to control. Today is not. Today gives you something you can actually influence. Your next decision, your next hour, your next action. And when you begin thinking this way, you stop trying to control everything. You focus on what is within your reach. You cannot control whether everyone likes your work. You can control whether you improve it. You cannot control whether every application gets accepted. You can control how many skills you develop. You cannot control whether your first attempt succeeds. You can control whether you make a second attempt. You cannot control how quickly other people progress. You can control whether you keep moving. This shift is incredibly freeing, because comparison is another form of resistance. It steals your attention from your own work and gives it to someone else's journey. You look at someone who is already successful and compare their result with your beginning. That comparison is unfair. You are looking at their visible achievement while ignoring their invisible years. You do not see their failures. You do not see their uncertainty. You do not see the opportunities they missed. You do not see the days when they wanted to quit. You only see the final picture. And then you use that picture to judge yourself. Stop doing that. Your competition is not the person beside you. Your competition is the version of yourself that keeps making excuses. Every time you defeat that version, even for one day, you move forward. And sometimes moving forward means doing less. This sounds strange, but it matters. If your life is filled with constant stimulation, your mind becomes uncomfortable with silence. You need another video, another notification, another conversation, another distraction, another piece of information. But meaningful work often requires the opposite. Quiet, attention, patience, the ability to sit with boredom without immediately escaping it. Because boredom is not always a problem. Sometimes boredom is the doorway to concentration. When you stop feeding your mind constant stimulation, you begin noticing thoughts that were previously buried underneath noise. Ideas appear, questions appear, creative possibilities appear, and sometimes you discover that you were never lacking ideas. You were simply never quiet enough to hear them. This is especially important for creative work. Creation requires space. You cannot constantly consume and expect your mind to endlessly produce. You need moments when you are not receiving information. Moments when you are simply thinking, observing, walking, writing, experimenting, living. Because inspiration rarely arrives on command. But it often appears when you have created the conditions for it. And this leads to another important truth. You cannot force inspiration to appear, but you can prepare yourself to receive it. You can sit at the desk. You can open the document. You can pick up the instrument. You can begin the sketch. You can start writing. You can practice. And sometimes the first few minutes feel empty. Then something happens. The mind begins moving. One idea creates another. A sentence creates another sentence. A solution appears. What looked impossible 15 minutes ago suddenly becomes possible. This is why starting matters so much. The work itself can create the motivation you were waiting for. You do not always need motivation to begin. Sometimes beginning creates motivation. And there is something deeply important about doing meaningful work even when nobody is watching. Because external validation is unstable. Today people may praise you. Tomorrow they may ignore you. One video may perform extremely well. The next may barely be noticed. One person may tell you that you are talented. Another may tell you that you are wasting your time. If your identity depends on these opinions, you will constantly be thrown from confidence to insecurity. But if your satisfaction comes from knowing that you did the work honestly, your foundation becomes stronger. You can appreciate praise without becoming dependent on it. You can accept criticism without allowing it to destroy you. You can experience failure without turning it into an identity. You can succeed without becoming addicted to approval. And that is a powerful kind of freedom. Because eventually, you realize something. The work itself is part of the reward. Learning is a reward. Improvement is a reward. Discipline is a reward. Becoming more capable is a reward. Watching yourself do something today that you could not do 6 months ago is a reward. These rewards are available even before the world notices. And perhaps that is the greatest protection against resistance. You stop asking the world to prove that your effort matters. You decide that it matters because you chose it. But choosing meaningful work does not mean the journey becomes easy. In fact, sometimes the opposite happens. The more seriously you take your potential, the more clearly you see your weaknesses. You discover how much you still need to learn. You see people who are better than you. You notice your mistakes. You realize how far you have to go. And that can be uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always evidence that something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that you are growing. A beginner feels uncomfortable because everything is unfamiliar. A professional feels uncomfortable because they are constantly pushing the limits of what they can do. Growth and comfort rarely travel together for very long. So when you feel uncomfortable, do not immediately ask, how can I escape this? Sometimes ask a different question. What is this discomfort trying to teach me? Maybe it is showing you that you need more practice. Maybe you need better preparation. Maybe you need patience. Maybe you need to accept criticism. Maybe you need to stop seeking perfection. Maybe you need to become more consistent. Discomfort can become information, and once you learn to treat it that way, fear becomes less powerful. You stop seeing every obstacle as a wall. You begin seeing obstacles as training. The difficult project trains your problem solving. The rejection trains your resilience. The criticism trains your humility. The boring repetition trains your discipline. The uncertain period trains your patience. And slowly, the person who once wanted an easy life begins wanting a meaningful one. Because meaningful does not mean easy. Meaningful means worth doing. There will still be days when you question yourself. There will still be moments when you feel behind. There will still be times when the old excuses return. But now you have something you did not have before. Evidence. Evidence that you can act even when you are afraid. Evidence that you can continue when motivation disappears. Evidence that you can return after failure. Evidence that you can keep a promise to yourself. And every time you create another piece of evidence, your identity becomes stronger. You begin to trust yourself. And self-trust may be one of the greatest forms of confidence. Not the confidence that says everything will work. The confidence that says whatever happens, I will face it. That is different, because you no longer need certainty before moving forward. You only need courage for the next step. And that brings us back to where the entire battle began. The moment when you are sitting there, thinking about whether to begin. Nothing dramatic is happening. Nobody is forcing you. Nobody is watching. There is only you and the decision in front of you. You can open the phone. You can choose the distraction. You can tell yourself that tomorrow will be different. Or you can begin. One page, one problem, one paragraph, one exercise, one application, one idea, one honest attempt. It may not change your entire life today. It can change the direction of your life. And direction matters more than speed. Because if you keep walking in the right direction, even slowly, you eventually arrive somewhere different. So the next time resistance appears, do not panic. Do not argue with it for an hour. Do not try to convince yourself that you suddenly feel inspired. Recognize it. Accept that it is there. And then work anyway. Because the goal was never to become someone who feels no fear. The goal was to become someone who refuses to let fear choose their future. The goal was never to eliminate every distraction. The goal was to decide what deserves your attention. The goal was never to become perfect. The goal was to become consistent. And the goal was never simply to achieve something impressive. The deeper goal was to become the kind of person capable of creating it. That transformation is the real victory. Because when you change who you are through repeated action, the external results eventually have something to stand on. And perhaps one day, you will look back at the person who kept saying tomorrow and barely recognize them. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because you finally stopped waiting for it to become easy. You started before you felt ready. You continued when it became difficult. You returned when you failed. You worked when nobody was watching. And little by little, the invisible battle became a different kind of life. So if there is something you have been postponing, remember this. You do not need another perfect plan. You do not need another motivational speech. You do not need permission. You need a beginning. And after that beginning, another action. Then another. Then another. Because the life you want is not waiting somewhere far away for you to discover it. It is being constructed by what you choose to do today. The resistance will always have another excuse. Let it speak. You do not have to answer. You only have to keep working. And when the day comes that nobody else believes in what you are building, remember that your responsibility was never to convince everyone. Your responsibility was to keep showing up. Because dreams do not become real simply because we want them badly enough. They become real when someone is willing to return to the work again and again. When the excitement disappears. When the applause disappears. When certainty disappears. When the easy path disappears. That is when the real work begins. And that is when you discover whether your dream was only something you wished for. Or something you were willing to build. So tomorrow, when resistance arrives again, recognize it for what it is. A test of direction. A test of discipline. A test of whether your actions are controlled by your temporary feelings or by the person you have decided to become. You may not win every day, but you can return every day. And that may be enough. Because in the end, the greatest victory is not defeating resistance forever. It is becoming stronger than the excuse that once controlled you. And once you understand that, the war changes. The enemy may still appear. Fear may still whisper. Doubt may still knock. But you are no longer waiting for them to leave. You are moving forward anyway. This is the real war of art. Not a battle against the world. Not a battle against other people. A battle within yourself. Between comfort and growth. Between fear and courage. Between intention and action. Between the life you keep imagining and the life you are willing to build. And every single day, you get another chance to choose. Choose the work. Choose the next step. Choose progress over perfection. Choose action over excuses. Because one day, your future self will be living with the consequences of what you choose today. Make sure that future person has something to thank you for. This is volume and vision. Keep learning, keep creating, and most importantly, keep showing up.